crazy Thanksgiving night.
So I'm a male nurse at a large hospital in San Francisco. I work in the ER, and as is custom, Thanksgiving night was very busy. Now my wife is also a nurse for the same hospital. She works in labor and delivery. Between babies being born left and right and the people coming into the ER, we hadn't had a chance to take our break together, as we try to do every shift. So when she called, I figured it was to say she wanted to meet up for a bite to eat in the cafeteria. When I answered, I heard in the background a male voice screaming profanities, and my wife, who is fluent in Spanish, trying to calm this guy down. She told me their pager wasn't working and they needed security stat. I quickly hung up, called for security, and told my fellow nurses what was going on, and ran for labor and delivery, worried sick about my wife, when I ran almost square smack dab into this visibly angry man. He wasn't huge, but bro definitely worked out and not at a gym. He was covered in prison tattoos and he was obviously a banger. I work out regularly, but I knew this guy could kick my ass. He looked at me, gave me this sick grin, and started heading towards me, spouting off in Spanish. I don't speak fluent Spanish, but what I could understand scared the living shit out of me. I'm backing up as fast as I can. I start buzzing the door to the ER frantically for them to let me in. This guy's literally a foot away from me and the door opens and I'm pulled into safety by a doctor. Gangbanger punches the door a few times, making a dragging sign across his throat while grinning at both of us. Next thing I know, the police rush into the corridor he's in, and it takes 2 security officers and 2 cops to subdue this dude. I finally make it to my wife, who thankfully was shaken up but unhurt. She explained to me what happened. A young girl, only 14, came in, high fever, vomiting, distended belly. The banger claimed he was her brother and they needed to cut her open and get her baby. They did an ultrasound and to their horror they realized she wasn't pregnant. She had bags of drugs in her stomach. It's very common for drug mules to bring over young women from Mexico carrying drugs that way. Homeboy freaked out when they informed him his sister needed emergency surgery, and no, he wasn't getting his drugs. Thankfully, the girl survived, but the sad thing is she will most likely be deported once she recovers. So, gangbanger who wants to kill me? Let's never meet again.
Why I always keep my door closed and locked.
Growing up, I always had the front or back door open with a latched screen or glass door to let in lighter air. I was used to that, and it never occurred to me when I got my own place to do anything else. Several years ago, when I moved into my first rental, I was just cleaning up and unpacking things, and as it was summer, I had the door open with the glass door latched. Eventually, I heard the neighbor's dog start barking, and then a knock at my door. Standing outside was a guy who looked fairly normal, although his behavior was slightly anxious. That didn't seem too weird though, because he said he was selling magazine subscriptions to make extra money, etc. At the time, I'd had more than one person come to the door saying that, although before it had usually been high school students. This guy was probably 30 or so, which made it a bit awkward. I told him I was sorry, but I didn't have any money. I closed and latched the door again, and he walked off. I actually wasn't at all afraid or nervous. I actually thought he was nervous or embarrassed to be so much older than the people who usually get jobs like that. So I went about my day, perfectly normal. Got the kitchen unpacked and put away, etc. I decided I didn't want to mess it all up by cooking yet, so I grabbed my keys and went down the stairs. An honest to God chill went up my back, raising the hair on my arms when I saw the door. There were greasy prints all over it. Not just handprints, but prints from a face, squished all around as the guy tried to see different angles into my house. I immediately closed the door back and locked it, then called my uncle and his son to come hang out with me for a while. Luckily, I never saw him again, but I never unlocked the glass door if someone knocked. I just talked to them through it. So yeah, creepy magazine salesman. Let's not meet.
Why I hate city buses.
This encounter happened literally yesterday, and it kind of shook me, so I wanted to share it. To preface, I'm a 17-year-old girl with a smaller build and only 5'6", so I'm a bit defenseless. So I've been living in the city and taking the city buses everywhere for a few months now, and I haven't had any bad experiences until yesterday. Yesterday was Black Friday, so a friend of mine was going to meet me at a mall north of town to go shopping. To get to the mall, I had to take a bus from my neighborhood, get off at a bus exchange, and take a different bus to get to my destination. On this first bus, I'm just sitting in the back level by myself. Diagonally to my front left is a man with a leather jacket. He's maybe 35 to 40, with orange-colored hair. After the woman sitting beside him gets off, he turns to me and asks me if I'm from Campbell River. To this I say no, and he tells me I look like a girl he knows from there, and he tells me I'm very beautiful. So I just say thanks and try to put my earbuds back in, but he keeps making conversation with me. He asks me personal questions about my life and background, like where I'm from, why I'm here, what's my name and age. I lied about a lot of it because I was uncomfortable and he was a creepy stranger. But since I'm a friendly person by nature, I was being a little nice. After telling me about himself, he says him and I should hang out sometime. I was taken aback by this, and he moves to the row of seats behind me and leans forward over the seat beside me. Now in my personal space, he keeps blabbing on about his life, and I'm not saying a word at this point. I'm frantically texting my friends about how creeped out I am, while leaning my head over so he wouldn't see my phone screen. Finally, we get to the bus exchange, and to my luck, he gets off too. Although I was supposed to go to the next bus, I saw it wasn't there yet and went down the stairs to a mall at the bus exchange. I notice he's following me. I run into the mall entrance and run through it to the front entrance. I can hear him yelling for me to wait for him, and I book it around the entire building and run all the way back up to the bus stop to see that the bus I was supposed to take was at its stop, like some shining light of God. I waited on the bus and it leaves, thankfully without him. My day carries on, but I was still shaken by the encounter because I'm frail and it was really upfront. So, creepy middle-aged man, let's not meet again.
My stalker broke into my house and stole a pic of me.
So let's get some things cleared up before I start. I live in the US, specifically in the Deep South. Lots of rednecks, trailers, and Trump supporters. I live in a lower middle class but safe neighborhood. My house, or street, has a hill with woods at the top, literally right behind my house/street. So let's begin. It all started May of last year. I walked into my house after school, my parents gone and my brother coming in about 25 minutes. So I put on sweatpants, pulled my hair up, the usual. In the South, it's really hot in May, so I go to open the windows. I get to one window towards the back of my house and see that the screen is tore, enough for a human to fit in. I just assumed my cats or my dog had broken it, as they are in and out throughout the day, with my grandmother watching over the house from about 8:30 a.m. to noon. So I walk through the living room. I notice something off about the mantle. I figure out what it is. A picture frame is sitting there, empty. The picture that used to be there was, you guessed it, of me. Chills go up my spine. It's creepy, but nothing to get my panties in a wad about. I just assumed my grandmother took it so she could bring it back to her house. So logical. Fast forward to 2 nights later. Friday night, nothing unusual. Relaxing in my bed, watching Shane Dawson, munching on pretzels. I'm alone upstairs, as my parents and brother are downstairs. I hear banging coming from my bathroom window. I just thought it was my cat. From the darkness of my hallway, I can just about make out a figure of a tall person standing and facing me. My blood runs cold. I scream for my dad. The figure moves away, back into the bathroom, and I hear the window shut. My dad gets upstairs and I tell him what happened. He grabs a bat from the garage and tells my mom and brother to go into my parents' room with me. My dad finds nothing. That night, I think back to the picture thing. I call my grandma and she says she never touched the picture. Creepy. Anyways, that's my story. No new encounters since May. Maybe the fact of my dad yielding a baseball bat and yelling, "Come back here, pedo," into the darkness scared him away. By the way, I've had many experiences like this, from being followed by strangers to having creepy middle-of-the-night encounters.
Crackheads meowing in the park on Thanksgiving.
Yesterday on Thanksgiving, I woke up from having slept late and wanted to go for a walk in the park before the sun went down. As I pulled into the parking lot, I noticed a van next to me. There was a woman outside the passenger door of the van. She whirled around and stared at me for about 6 seconds. Her face was completely cracked out. It had that sunken reptile look. Her eyes were absolutely dead. I could tell she was completely out of it. In the driver's seat was a greasy-looking man. He was just staring at me. I got out of the car and wasn't too worried yet because this park is kind of on a busy street. I began walking towards the path that would lead me into the park while constantly looking behind me. The crackheads were now in their van, rooting around for something. As I made my way further into the park, the sun began fading fast. I was also upset because I really look forward to walking in the park for stress relief. But the darker it got, I kept worrying that the couple were following me or waiting around the next bend for me. Finally, I gave up any chance of enjoying this stroll and decided to return to my car. And this is where it gets doubly odd. As I exited the trees and made my way back to my car, I saw the van. At this point, I was about 2 minutes from my car. The woman was outside the passenger door again, only this time the man was standing next to her. She began making sharp, high-pitched meowing noises and then moaning. Then a blue light appeared before my feet and kind of danced back and forth in front of my feet. The guy was holding a flashlight and shining it through the van windows directly in front of me. Every internal alarm I had was going off. Both the man and the woman were watching me with dead eyes, the woman still meowing. I was too afraid to run back into the trees and risk an incident where no one would be around to help me. I decided to just risk the chance that I might be faster than them, that I could get in my car quicker than they could do whatever it was that they were going to do to me. I began walking at a very fast clip towards my car while keeping an eye on them. As I got 5 feet from my driver's door, the man made a beeline for me, his blue light hitting me in the eyes. He was right at my trunk heading for my driver's door when I shut it and locked the doors immediately. The woman walked to my passenger door and just stared at me. The guy did the same at my driver door. I flicked the man off and very obviously mouthed the words, "Fuck you," in slow motion. I started my car and sped off away from the park and returned home. Then I called my family, who are all in different states than me, and told them I loved them and missed them.
The night I was almost kidnapped.
This happened 7, maybe 8 years ago, back when I was 22. I was working the third shift at a hotel as the night manager, and had been for a few years by then. I'd gotten used to the creepers and drunks, and the eerie feeling of being the only employee on staff had all but vanished. It was just a job, and I loved it. I could play video games on my laptop behind the desk all night, and was rarely bothered other than an occasional rowdy drunk group or those late-night gross calls. The front of my hotel had 2 outside glass doors, an entryway, just newspaper machines, and another set of glass doors to enter the hotel. My desk was about 10 steps forward and 10 steps to the left once inside. So around 2 a.m. one night, I remember because it was after my audit, this guy came in, under 6 foot, skinny, white, scruffy, wearing a baseball cap, jeans, and a tan jacket. He didn't come all the way in though. He was in the entryway, opened one door about halfway, looked at me, up at the cameras, and backed his head out a little bit, but didn't shut the door. Immediate red flags. I asked if I could help him, and he told me that there was a broken sprinkler on our property that was flooding the street. I informed him that we didn't use in-ground sprinklers. Ours were attached to the building and rained down. We didn't have large plots of grass or flowers since we were surrounded by other businesses. He insisted it was ours, and it was flooding the street. I again informed him that we don't use in-ground sprinklers, and that it most likely belonged to one of the surrounding businesses, and that I would call around in the morning when they are all opened and let him know. He was really anxious. I wasn't sure if it was because he wanted to rob me or if it was because he was weirdly concerned about a broken sprinkler. Now he wanted me to come outside with him to see. I told him I wasn't allowed to leave the desk, but really I just didn't want to be outside where there are no cameras. He lingered, thinking, then just said, "What about the sprinkler then? It's wasting water." I told him there was nothing I could do right now. I offered to call non-emergency and have a police officer come by if that would ease him. He said no, they can't do anything about it, and left after silently lingering again. After he left, my adrenaline kicked in. I hadn't realized how scared I was until he was gone. I was shaking. I decided to call my boyfriend and thought about calling the owner at home, but didn't feel it was necessary to wake him up. I did, however, call around to the other hotels nearby and told them what had happened. Us night shifts were pretty close, and anytime something weird happened, we'd do call-arounds to warn the others. Fast forward about 10 minutes. I'm talking to my boyfriend and repeating the events, and my curiosity really piqued. I had to know if there was in fact a broken sprinkler. Maybe I was blowing this out of proportion. I needed a smoke bad too, so I kept my boyfriend on the phone and went outside. No broken sprinkler in sight. I was through the parking lot towards a restaurant about 300 or 400 feet away, and I see the broken sprinkler. It would be obvious to anyone that this sprinkler belonged to the restaurant. It was gushing water, bent sideways, like it had been run over or kicked. Then I noticed the pickup truck on the other side and the restaurant's parking lot. This area had one street light, wasn't very lit. It was parked sideways, passenger door facing me, and it was open. I started hustling it back to the hotel when I heard the truck start up. I looked behind me and saw the same man looking at me through the open passenger door. I couldn't see his face, but I saw that baseball cap and the tan jacket. He drove off very quickly, not even shutting the passenger door. I called the cops immediately and filed a report. The police made our hotel part of their nightly patrol for a few days after that, but I never saw him again.
Creepy car man.
I did my first year of college in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, in a state I wasn't originally from. This particular city has a shitty bus system, so I got pretty used to walking while I was there. One day I was walking to volunteer at a local children's theater, and I passed by a sketchy motel. There were 3 or 4 cars in the parking lot, and I managed to accidentally make eye contact with a dude in an old beat-up white sedan. I didn't get a great look at him, but I would say he was late 20s, early 30s, and he was wearing a black hoodie. He was sitting with another passenger, and when we locked eyes, he gave me a hateful glare. I instantly felt like something was off. However, I just glanced back at the ground and kept walking, but at a slightly faster pace. As I passed the motel, I turned back to make sure I was fine. As I glanced back at the car, I saw him getting out of it, and when we made eye contact again, he started running straight for me. At this, I broke out in a sprint, trying to find a store to duck into. I hear him getting much closer to me after about a block, and thankfully there was a Subway on the other side of the street. I knew he was close, so I started just screaming really loud and ran across the street, straight into the Subway. I stopped screaming as I pushed the door open. Once inside, I looked out the window and he was gone. I sat down and almost started crying. I was so scared. The guy at the front counter immediately came over and asked if I was okay and called the police for me. The cops ended up driving me back to campus and I skipped volunteering that day. Creepy guy who chased me. Let's never meet again.
Halloween of '01.
From the title, you know this happened in 2001 on Halloween night to be specific. I was 7. If you want to know my current age, do the math. My mom helped me remember this one, so if there are further questions, I will ask her, as she remembers the night vividly. It was freezing, probably within the 20 to 30 degree range. I was hell-bent on going out anyways. I wanted my pillowcase to be stocked full of sweets, damn it. I dressed as a cat. Not too hard to imagine that. Now at the time, I had zero idea, but my rock star mom was on it, and you can thank her for her on-par memory. My mom noticed a very tall man dressed in all black. Mom said he had black jeans on, black trench coat, and a black hockey mask. He had no kids with him, so that was a huge red flag to my mom. But he did have a pumpkin basket to put candy in. He followed us around, house to house, always stayed back 3 or 4 houses according to Mom. After 20 minutes or so, she shrugged it off, thinking this was some really tall kid just innocently out trick-or-treating. But the more she said she kept shrugging it off, the more uneasy she felt. Now I do remember my pillowcase was only half full and my mom was hurrying us home and me being super pouty about it. I do not, however, remember Mom putting the house on lockdown after we got in the front door. But she remembers and said she did it very quickly. I ate some candy, brushed my teeth, got into bed. Mom laid down next to me. I remember this and thought it was a little weird since I was sleeping on my own at age 7. Now, this is where my mom really helped me out with this story, as I had no idea until we talked about it earlier. Fast forward to the morning. There was a pumpkin basket full of candy with a note on top of it that said, "Meow," in chicken scratch, on our front porch right outside the front door. My mom threw out the candy in case it was tampered with, and she burned up the note. Now, what creeps me out, and I just found out from my mom earlier, is that in the middle of the night she got up from my bed to recheck the house, looked out the window, and saw him in our front lawn staring at our house with the pumpkin basket in his hand. She didn't think he noticed her. She called the police immediately. She briefed the officer on what happened. The officer said he'd do a few rounds and patrol the area. My mom never heard back from the officer that night, or ever, she said. Mom also told me that she stayed up the entire night with a pistol in her lap after seeing him in the front yard. Since that night and up until right now, nothing weird with him has happened since. But as for his intentions, zero idea.
No, mister. I will not be your brothel sex slave.
I work at a small coffee shop where I often close alone, with maybe 1 or 2 customers at the end of the night. There is a man who will come in with his older wife. They are both about 60 and sit on the computers all day using the Wi-Fi, not talking to each other. I love the internet too, but damn. They buy a day-old donut and then just sit. The guy is short and white and stocky and has long hair and little granny glasses. I'm 5'11", so I tower over him and always thought he was weird, but never gave him too much thought or felt scared of him until the other night. I was closing and it was just him and me. His wife wasn't there. Often they get into fights and she leaves crying after he yells at her. He's a real keeper. So I didn't think much about it. He came up at the end of the night and got a coffee to go. I asked his name for the cup out of habit and he said, "Put master on it." Immediately I felt myself turn bright red and get uncomfortable and said, "No." He laughed. I just turned around and made his drink and put it on the bar. I could feel him looking at me the whole time, but tried not to seem nervous. He said, "Do you know what I do?" I shook my head no. He told me he runs a brothel called Secret Garden that specializes in extreme BDSM. We live in Washington State. Brothels are not legal. And that he likes seeing women with fat wallets. He said he thought I'd be really successful as a sub, even though I'm so tall. He said he'd love to chain me and show me the lifestyle, and that I'd love it. I again felt myself get bright red and start to shake because it didn't feel normal. I get a lot of weirdos because of Seattle's huge tweaker population, and I get a lot of gang members, but I want to make it explicit. This didn't feel right. It felt scary, and my intuition was screaming no, even though BDSM doesn't freak me out. I told him I needed to close early. I followed him out and locked the door behind him, but not before he winked at me and was clearly getting off at my discomfort. I had such a strong feeling that I told one of the cops that comes in frequently who I'm close with. He looked into it and said that there was a warrant out for this guy because he was trafficking underage girls and violence against them, and he is involved in a missing persons case that is centered around an underage Hispanic girl. He hasn't been back, but as soon as I see him or his incredibly weird and distinct van, I'm supposed to call 911 ASAP. Mr. BDSM brothel man, let's not meet again, even if you'll fill my panty pockets. Yes, tragically, that is a direct quote. I hope that the little girl is found safe soon. She's 13.
The narrow escape.
This happened years ago when I was about 8 and my older brother was 10. My dad was stationed in Japan and this was about 3 years in, so we were very familiar with the area. So no one thinks badly of my mother, who is amazing. Crime, and harm to children in particular, was punished with incredible severity, so it was normally very, very safe to be out by ourselves. We decided to walk the 5 blocks off base to our favorite store to buy some new toys with our allowance. It also had a huge arcade on the very top level, about 20 floors up. We go out the base, across the tracks, and make our one left turn to go to the store. It's a straight shot from the gate, really. As we pass one of the first shops, I notice an Arab man in an all-white traditional dress loitering in the alleyway. He stood out, not only because of his dress, but also because really anyone non-Asian stands out in that part of Japan. So we both see him, but don't really think too much of it. until he steps out behind us after about a half a block. We both take note, but it's not too strange, so we keep walking. Then he starts gradually catching up to us, deliberately enough that we both look at each other and can see we are equally uncomfortable. My mother had her own past traumas, and so was always very open about the dangers children faced, and I immediately had the feeling that this guy was not right. Something was off. So, seeing the look on my face, my brother leans in and says, "Let's see if he is." And we proceed to both speed up our pace and take a right, then 2 left turns, bringing us back to our original route. If he had been going his own way, he would have never done this, but sure enough, he followed the whole way, gaining enough on us that as soon as we hit the original street and saw him turn back on it to follow, my brother yelled at me to follow him, and we fucking ran our asses off. The guy shouted as soon as we took off, and the 2 times I glanced back, he was chasing at top speed. We did kiddie triathlons with my dad, and thank God we were in good condition because we ducked through street shops, took every alleyway we could the next 5 blocks to try to lose him, to no avail. Ended up booking it up 20 flights of escalators to the arcade, and then my older brother dragged me behind the biggest game we could find, up against the wall. We watched him come sprinting up the last escalator, realized he was on a floor packed with children, look around angrily, and then walk back down. Absolutely terrified. And this was before cell phones or anything, so we still had to get home. Brother, for the win again, hailed a cab out the front of the store with tons of people around and made the gate guard at the base call our parents to come pay for it and pick us up. Needless to say, we stayed on base for a good while after that, because scary Arab kidnapper. Let's really not meet. Edit. I reminded my brother of this, and he said what I didn't remember was that there was a black car pacing us too, and that's why he took us through so many small back alleys, to lose the car as well. That makes it way scarier that he had backup.
He touched my child.
A few years ago, my ex-husband and I were eating at the mall with my 2-year-old daughter. She was happily munching on a cookie and watching Yo Gabba Gabba on my phone. This old Japanese man, probably 70, walked up to us and started commenting on how pretty she is. She has curly strawberry blonde hair and sea green eyes with super pale skin, and how she looks so healthy. I say thank you. Old people always love adorable kids, so I don't freak out immediately. He then proceeds to stroke her cheek and run his hand through her hair and talks about how we should bring her to his office because he's a pediatrician and he'd love to treat her. I pick her up from the high chair and hold her in my lap so he won't touch her again. My ex-husband tries to politely give cues for him to go the fuck away, but he doesn't take the hint. Then, while I'm holding her, he bends over and runs his hand over her leg and gives her this creepy smile and says, "It's okay, I'm a pediatrician." I scoop back, glaring as I say, "Don't touch my fucking kid," and stand up to start putting her in her stroller. We leave and he follows us out to the car asking to play with my daughter. A few weeks pass and I go back to the same mall and end up bumping into him again. This time, my ex-husband was at work. So, I'm in Sephora and picking up some makeup, and I have my back turned for a minute, and I hear, "Mommy?" And I turn to see the fucker holding my daughter. I get her back from him and loudly say, "Get the fuck away from my child," and go to the mall security to tell them. They couldn't find him. After that, we never went back to the mall. So, creepy old fuck, let's not meet.
Creepy old guy followed me home.
Hey, I'm new to this and not the greatest writer, but here it goes. I was in the 7th grade. It was during winter that all of this happened. My 2 friends, Kyle and Paul, and I used to meet up and walk to school every morning, and we would walk home together every afternoon. We always took the same route. School was about a 15-minute walk from our meetup spot. One afternoon, we're all walking home, but that day we had another friend with us, Sam. I did not like this kid. He would always do really crappy stuff, and he was a little prick. So we're all walking home, and Sam is making snowballs. He's throwing them at buses and stop signs. Sam grabs one last snowball and throws it at a car. All of a sudden, from the back seat of that car, we see an older man sit up in the back seat. He rose up like Dracula awakening from a coffin. The old dude gets out of the car and walks towards us. He tilts his head to the side, looks at us with a smile and says, "Thank you." And then that's when the camera came out of his pocket. He began walking around us and taking pictures. We were holding our hands to our faces, but he would swat our hands away and snap pictures, all with this fucked up smile on his face. My buddy Kyle was a big kid for his age, and he jumps at the old guy, but gets knocked to the ground with a punch. The old man just leans over Kyle while he is on the ground and starts snapping pics. Kyle gets up and we all start running. The guy runs to his car while yelling, "I'm gonna find out where you live." We cut through a park, and as we reach the end of the park, he pulls up in front of us. We run back the other direction, and he caught up with us in his car again. So we faked running one direction and cut through some backyards which led to my street. And we got away from him. Kyle's older brother drove us to school for the next week. One day he was unable to drive me home and I had to walk. Paul didn't come to school. I was alone. I thought enough time had passed and I was safe. I made it all the way to my street. I was about 5 houses away from home when a car slowly creeped up beside me. I didn't even hear it behind me. I look up and it's this creepy old fuck again, smiling at me. I told you I would find out where you lived." He licks his teeth. I did the first thing that popped into my mind. I just looked at him and sat on the snowy curb. I said, "Go ahead and try to find out which one is my house. I can sit here all night." And I quickly added, "Oh, and the guy that lives in the house behind me is a fucking cop," which was a total lie. He stared at me for a couple minutes and just slowly drove away. I watched him turn the corner and he was gone. I sat in the snow for a good hour. Eventually I went home and called the cops. They found the guy because I knew the plate numbers. Turns out he lived right on our path to school. Never saw him again though. And I don't know what he did with all those pictures he took of us. Creepy old guy who followed me home. Let's not meet.
ice skating pervert.
First, some background. I'm an ice hockey player and I go skating on Friday nights for fun. I'm 5'5", 16, female, and not very intimidating to those taller than me. To begin, it was another Friday night. I get home, get ready, and then head out to the bus stop. Upon arriving, I noticed the crowd at the arena was a lot larger than usual. This is strange because Friday nights are usually for the more experienced because the disco lights make it harder to see. Amongst the crowd, I see a tall guy, I'd say around 23, holding a pair of hockey skates. He seemed to be flirting with 3 girls in the line. I didn't take much more interest and proceeded to pay for my sessions and joined the line. Heading in, I instantly go to the lockers and begin putting my things inside. He walks past me and sits down on a bench a couple centimeters away. He's talking to friends of mine, my age too, and I begin eavesdropping. He was telling them how fit they were and how he would. I looked at him and glared. He laughed and said, "What?" in the most childish voice you could imagine. About a half hour later, everyone's on the ice, skating, dancing. Everyone seems to be having a great time, until I feel a hand on my shoulder. It was my friend, we'll call her Rachel, and she looked horrified. She went on to tell me that he'd been touching her butt and he tried taking her glasses off and kept telling her to "come here, baby." I was furious that he thought that that was acceptable. Rachel told me she'd be fine and we carried on skating around in the clockwise system they had. Forward to the second session. By now, all my friends had arrived. Everyone's blood was pumping and it was beginning to be the best night ever. But you guessed it, Big Boy is chasing after my friends again, and I wasn't having it. I sped up and met his pace. He looked down at me and smiled. I glared and told him he was out of order. He laughed and told me to shut up. I screamed and told him he was disgusting and that he was pathetic. He skated off and I couldn't follow as I tired myself out from shouting. My other friends, who were guys, came over and they got me to explain what had happened. They'd been watching off the ice at the side and skated on as soon as he'd left. They're all between 5'10" and 6'4", so I felt safe. They skated around with us for a while and I practically forgot the whole thing. Skating finished and my 2 friends and I, we'll call them Alice and Kira, were walking back to Alice's house. We were giggling and talking about some of the lads we were there with as teenagers do. But Kira noticed something. Every corner we turned or changed in pace, a guy behind us copied. Further investigation of the stranger showed it was the guy from before. I kept cool and said that he was a harmless creep and that we should keep walking. Alice got worried as we were close by her house and she didn't want him to know where she lived. We took a left back into town, and he followed. We took an alley that led back to the path which led to her house. He followed. Then we ran. Alice ahead with her keys, me in the middle and Kira behind panicking. He hadn't realized until he was too far behind to catch up. We got to Alice's and we calmed down, ordered some pizza and talked about it all. I'd never seen him there before. I'd never been so afraid to be on the ice. I'd hate to think what would have happened if we hadn't ran, or whether he'll be there again. So, creepy ice skater, let's not meet again.
Help me find my dog.
This all took place when I was around 8 or 9. I lived in one of the more poor neighborhoods of Las Vegas and had always been taught the dangers of adults with bad intentions. I had a best friend at the time, Gavin, who apparently had not been taught the same as me. Every single day, Gavin and I would walk home from the school, the 3 blocks from the elementary school down to his house, and then finally mine at the end of the street. We had been doing this for the better half of the school year without incidents. However, all it took was one singular moment for that to change. Gavin and I were making our regular trek from school towards Gavin's house, making jokes and exploring what we were going to do that day. It was usually watching Pokemon and reenacting our favorite scenes from the most recent episode. As we turned onto a street, a beat-up old red truck stopped on the road, and a ratty-looking older man with a salt and pepper beard and bloodshot eyes stuck his head out of the grimy-looking vehicle and immediately leaned towards Gavin and I, and in a sickly innocent voice, filled to the brim with worry, he asked us, "Would you two help me find my dog? I think she's just down the block. She likes to run off on me and I could really use your help." I was skeptical at best. I shook my head and explained that I really had to get home and that my mother was waiting for me. But Gavin promptly said yes and ran towards the truck without a second's hesitation. I was frozen in place, my frame icing over in a cold fear and suspicion. The truck took off and I was left on the side of the road cursing Gavin and wondering what the hell I was going to do now. As a child, I didn't realize that moment could have been the last I would ever see of my best friend. A dozen thoughts ran through my mind of whether to get Gavin's mother or my own, but at the moment, the very real thought that he was attempting to kidnap us wasn't on my mind. All I knew was that he gave me a very bad vibe and I was to never go off with strangers. I had only made it a couple more steps down the road before the unmistakable clunking of the man's red truck hissed up behind me. I froze in fear before it quickly took off, speeding away and leaving Gavin in its mists. I was so relieved. I turned and saw my friend clutching $1 to his chest and running towards me, showing off his new reward. I asked him if they'd found the dog and Gavin said no, that they drove around the block and he was given the $1 and dropped back off on our street. We never told our parents and I never saw the man again, but it wasn't until years later that I realized that the only reason that man let Gavin go was because I didn't go. And out there, an 8-year-old girl would know what this man looked like and what car he drove if Gavin never came back. So, creepy fake dog owner in the red truck, let's not meet ever again.
Two and a half men.
This happened over 10 years ago, when I was growing up in my childhood home. My neighborhood was filled with kids around my age, and we used to have the best street football and baseball games ever. The usual group consisted of about 8 of us, though sometimes much larger when the other side of the neighborhood got involved. Anyways, this particular day there was only 5 of us. I remember this because the odd number forced us to play 2-on-2 with an all-time quarterback. Then for baseball, we decided instead on a home run derby. This was just all around the best idea with only 5 of us, or so we thought. So our home run wall was essentially the end of a cul-de-sac. On both sides of the street were the backyards of homes, so this meant if we were to hit a foul ball, it was pretty much guaranteed to end up in one of the backyards. But we foolishly never thought it would happen as often as it did. Within 10 minutes of playing, likely still on the first round, and we were running out of tennis balls. We had hit at least 5 balls into different backyards, but like 3 into one particular backyard. So we decided to just hop the wall and grab our balls back really quickly. Now I should also mention that we decided to play in a different spot than usual, on the outskirts of our neighborhood, where we weren't really all that familiar with the neighbors. I don't really even remember why we chose to play there, but we did. Anyways, me and my friend Russell were the two who decided to hop the wall and retrieve our tennis balls. He went over first, me right behind him. Immediately something didn't feel right. The backyard was very unkempt. I'm talking bushes 3 feet high spreading throughout the whole perimeter of the backyard. We both pretty much landed in the bushes, turned to each other and kind of giggled nervously. On top of the unkempt yard, after arriving on the other side of the wall, we can now hear what sounded like classical music with an opera singer singing in a foreign language. And I don't know why, but this really creeped me out. At this point, we were still behind a good amount of bushes, so we couldn't really see much, but we decided to try to get a glimpse around before trying to walk out into the somewhat open part of the yard. We found one ball and threw it over, but the other two were likely deeper in the yard. As we were looking for the other 2 tennis balls, we hear a window from the upstairs room open and the sounds of people whispering. Right as we're shitting bricks over the creepy whispering and foreign opera music, we see 2 older men with what seemed to be only bathrobes on, standing at the sliding glass door to the backyard, literally 10 feet from us. They are both just staring, not really showing any sort of emotion, but they for sure both see us. It didn't take anything else to convince us it was time to bail. We turned around and booked it up and over the wall, feet still running when we hit the ground. Our friends were just in shock as we came hauling ass telling them to run. We ran all the way back to the other side of the neighborhood, faster than I thought possible, and straight into my friend's side yard. As we are all trying to catch our breath, the other 3 keep asking us what happened. So I tell them the story as I did for you, except Russell had a slightly creepier version. Russell apparently caught a glimpse of the whisperer upstairs, and they were wearing a fucking baby face mask. And for the 2 guys just staring, I noticed that one of them had his hands behind his back. What I didn't notice was that he was handcuffed. Well, Russell did. We tried to figure out an explanation for what the hell we saw that day, but nothing ever really ended up making sense about it all. Even to this day, the only explanation that makes any sort of sense is that we interrupted some sort of bizarre sexual encounter, but even that doesn't explain the situation. Regardless of what was going on, it was haunting. So 2.5 men from my old neighborhood. Let's never meet again.
I just wanted to be his friend.
This all started with me a few months ago. Our school is relatively small, so everybody knows everyone. In our school, everybody gets along with everybody. Well, except for a few people, that is. Daniel being one of those people. Everybody always wanted to stay away from him, as something just seemed very wrong about him. I always thought that this was all very unfair towards him. I saw him as a poor, lonely boy who just wished for a friend. So one day I went talking with him. The more I talked with him, the more normal he was for me. Sure, he said a bit of weird stuff sometimes, but hey, everybody is weird in their own way, so I didn't let it faze me. We soon started hanging out and everything was fine for the first few weeks. I saw him as a great friend, and I thought he saw me the same. One day we were walking around the park. until he suddenly told me that he loved me and if I would like to be his girlfriend. I was extremely caught off guard. I never thought he would feel like this for me. I sighed quietly and told him that I didn't feel the same way, but I said we could still always be friends. His eyes widened with shock before he glared down on me. He grabbed my wrists and pulled me close to himself. He told me that he would kill himself if I wouldn't be his girlfriend. He said that I was the only thing that mattered to him and that he would have me, one way or another. I was extremely scared at this point. I quickly panicked as he leaned down, ready to kiss me. I did the only thing that I could think of at that point and kicked him in his groin. He groaned in pain and let go of me. I used that chance to quickly run away. I ran and ran, ignoring his screams behind me. I didn't stop until I got home. I quickly went into my room. I was home alone at that moment, so I quickly locked my doors and all my windows. I went into my room and instantly started to cry. I didn't know why I was crying. I just couldn't hold the tears back. The next day at school, I stayed together with my friends. I didn't talk to him. I didn't even look at him. But the whole day I could feel myself being watched, and I knew that it was Daniel. He sent me messages the whole day. He sent me his own drawn pictures. Some were of us having intercourse together, and others were of us kissing. It might not sound so scary, but for me it was absolutely terrifying. He sent me messages of how he would tie me up and take me to his home and put me inside of his closet. I, of course, blocked his number after that. I was scared for my life at this point. He hasn't tried to talk to me in a few weeks now, and I hope it stays this way, but still I'm keeping my guard up and always make sure I have somebody around me, and when I sleep I have my 2 dogs around me. I just really hope that this is the end and I won't ever have to talk or meet with Daniel again. Update. I finally showed my mother and father the messages, and they were in absolute shock. And my father looked like he was ready to kill Daniel. They instantly went to Daniel's parents' house and talked with them. They made an agreement that if Daniel ever bothers me again, that they would tell the police and show them the messages. I finally feel a lot better now. I think that Daniel will finally leave me alone, and if he should ever bother me again, then I have my parents who will support me. Thank you all for your suggestions. It really helped.
How much for baby?
I have read many of these Let's Not Meet stories on Reddit, and I have always been lucky that I didn't need to write my own, until now. My wife and I welcomed our son Lucas, not his real name of course, 6 months ago. It's been a learning curve, and this having babies thing is not for the birds, but things are finally starting to go smoothly. He is finally sleeping through the night, and that nasty colic he had is gone. I am very lucky that I get to work from home. Even luckier, my wife owns her own business, photographer, and she is home whenever she's not shooting a wedding or at her studio. Most mornings we take a 6.5-mile walk, and Lucas is strapped into his baby carrier, and we take off. We usually make it around halfway before we need to stop to give the little man a bottle, so he will pass out and let us finish the walk in peace. So like usual, we are about halfway done with our walk and the baby starts cranking up for a massive squall. We usually normally stop at either a park or this nice fountain area with a coffee shop and grocery store attached. We both wanted coffee in the worst way, so while I sat with the baby, Wife went into the coffee shop for our caffeine. I am slowly rocking Lucas as I feed him when I hear someone sit on the bench next to me. I smell her before I see her, a heavy cloying perfume. She's dolled up to the nines, an older woman, between her late 30s to 40s. She has that look that makes her look older than she probably is. What kind of baby is that? She inquires in a heavy Russian accent. I have a propensity for being a smartass, so I reply, a baby? No, what kind? Boy? Girl? She asks me as she starts smoothing out the romper we have on the baby. He is a boy, 6 months old, I add, a little freaked out that this perfect stranger is touching my kid. Looks healthy, how much he weigh? She asks, trying to pull the baby to her to get a good look at him. Now I'm hoping that my wife will come out any second, but of course she's in line waiting for our cappuccinos. I think 18 pounds. He was 9 at birth. I ramble on, hoping she will just go away. Lucas is drifting off to sleep when she leans over and just snatches him out of my arms. Ah, let me see, big boy. Big frame like Papa. You will be big boy, no? Now I am pissed. I ask her for him back while I glance into the coffee shop. My wife is at the counter at this point. Hand him over, now. I ask firmly, not to mention he is now awake and he is totally in that stranger danger stage, so he is pissed. She reluctantly hands him over. I try to calm him down, so at first I do not hear what she asks. How much for baby? I hear her the second time. He's not for sale. I am incredulous, and thankfully I see my wife get our drinks and grab our napkins and creamer. How much you want? I pay high price for baby. My wife finally comes out and sees the lady touching our kid. My wife is a total mama bear, so she gives the lady dagger eyes. So she gets up and before she goes, she looks at me and says, "You think about it, duh?" Then she walks away. I tell my wife everything, and of course she's as freaked out as me. Luckily, it's been a week and a half and we have yet to run into her again. So, crazy Russian lady who wanted to buy my kid? Let's never meet again. Edit. Just to clear some things up, we live in Canada, and there are a lot of Russian tourists that come through this part of Canada. We did alert the authorities, and no one had reported a woman prior to us calling asking to buy babies. However, today we found out at the supermarket this takes place, well, technically outside the market, that this woman was in the store last night and made a few families feel uncomfortable, following them around and touching the kids. Cops were called, but they let her off with a warning and she was kicked out of the store. Police are now aware of her, but unfortunately, unless she takes a baby or hurts someone, they can't do diddly squat to her. We still haven't run into her. Supposedly, according to the staff at the store, she lives nearby. So let's hope we don't run into her again. I won't ever hit a woman, as was suggested to me by a few readers, but my wife will not hesitate to knock a bitch out, and trust me, my wife is scary when she's angry.
Rest stop horror.
This isn't my story, it's my dad's, and it happened about 4 years ago while he was on a business trip for work. He is still freaked out about it to this day, and so he told me I could post it for him here on Reddit. My dad works for a large printing company and they had completed an overnight rush job for a business. My dad got tasked with dropping the order off. It would take 8 hours each way to drop off the order, and he was going to take my mom as she's a retired teacher and he figured it would be nice to have someone to drive each way. However, the night before he was going to leave, my mom came down with the flu. He left early the next morning and promised my mom if he got tired, he would stop either at a restaurant or a rest stop. So he made it without incident to drop off the papers. It was about noon when he set off again and soon realized the traffic was horrible. My dad decided that he'd take the long way home and it would add an hour or two, but he feared it would take longer to wait in the traffic. He drove straight for a few hours until he realized he had to pee, and badly. My dad is a prostate cancer survivor, so needless to say, he pees a lot. Also, he was starting to get sleepy and figured he should pull over and maybe get a quick nap in. It was winter, so at 4:30 the sun was starting to set, and he noticed the rest stop ahead. He got out, called my mom to tell her he was stopping to stretch his legs and maybe catch a little nap, then headed to the bathrooms. Now the place was pretty much deserted. There was an old Chevy parked next to my dad, and there was an RV with a family packing up what was probably their dinner. He went in the bathroom and opened the first stall, and he was in there doing his business when he hears someone talking. He thinks at first that they are talking to him until he realizes that the person is A, on the phone, or B, talking to themselves. It's okay, it's going to be okay. We will just take another, and then we will bring it to Mother. The man said to himself in a sing-songy voice. My dad said he sounded like he was young, between late teens to early 20s. Then, before my dad could say anything, while he zipped up his pants, starting to get a little freaked out, the guy screams and starts beating his head while screaming at himself in a woman's high falsetto. "You're a stupid boy, a stupid, stupid boy. Mother is very angry." At that, my dad runs out of the stall and he quickly opens the door and runs to his car. He locks the car door when he notices a skinny young man run out of the bathroom. He is looking for my dad and he sees him in his car. My dad had the car started and was backing up when the guy runs full tilt at him, screaming. My dad drove off. He was so shaken up by this, he pulled over in the next town over, at a diner, getting a coffee to go. He was paying for his coffee when the same Chevy pulls in. My dad grabs his coffee and hides his face looking at some knickknacks in the little gift shop. The kid walks in and goes up to the nice older cashier who my dad bought his coffee from, and he throws his arms around this woman and starts sobbing about how he's sorry, Mother, and how he let another one get away. My dad heard enough. He quickly tossed his coffee he hadn't drunk yet as it was too hot and made his way slowly to his car. He got in and sped off. He didn't stop till he was safely home. To this day, my dad refuses to stop at rest stops. So, creepy rest stop Norman Bates and your mother, I hope my father or I never meet you again.
Deranged intruder.
This happened a few years ago when I was still in high school, around sophomore year. After school every day, our group of friends, 4 of us, would go get something to eat and then walk back to our friend Todd's house. This was a routine for a few years by then and continued until the first one of us got our license. Anyways, we would get out of school around 3 and usually ended up back at Todd's by 4. This would leave us with about 2 hours before his parents got home, which we usually used for playing music really loud and sometimes smoking. So, needless to say, we were always in a rush to get back to his house so we'd have a good amount of time to party. This particular day, things went a bit different. We were going about our usual routine at the usual time. After getting tacos, we were on our way back to Todd's, which was maybe a 20-minute walk. The walk went as usual, and we arrived at his house about 4 o'clock. But as soon as we got to the front door of Todd's house, things got strange. First, we noticed his little plants and welcome mat had been moved around, but we kind of brushed it off without too much thought. After unlocking and opening the door, we noticed that there are muddy shoe prints scattered throughout the entry hall and living room. Now we are all getting a bit freaked out, 'cause that is not normal. But Todd doesn't really seem too freaked by it and says his dad must have come home from work early for some reason, and not to say anything stupid in case he hears. We all agree and start heading upstairs to Todd's room. The muddy footprints continue upstairs, but instead of leading to his parents' room, like we'd expected them to, they instead led to Todd's bathroom. Again, another sign that something wasn't right, and finally, this time Todd agreed. He walked up to the door slowly and said, "Dad, is that you? Is everything all right?" No response. So he asked again louder, "Dad, is everything all right?" Again, no response. But this time we heard movement from within the bathroom. We all just stood there for a good 10 seconds, not sure what to do, when Todd cracks open the door and peeks inside. He immediately pulls the door shut and says, "Let's go, let's go, let's go," and starts booking it down the stairs. After a second of disbelief and just standing there dumbfounded, it finally clicked, and I took off. I was the last one out the door, and as I got out, I realized that all 3 of them were still running away. This gave me the worst chill up my spine. I knew something was not right. Finally, I caught up with them at the end of his street and was freaking out. Todd was already on the phone with the cops telling them that there is an intruder in his home and giving them his information. The cops arrive within 5 minutes and we tell them what happened and that we don't know if he's still in there. So we tell the 2 cops where he was and they go in looking for him. Just as the 3rd policeman pulls up, the first 2 come walking out the front door with a handcuffed homeless man. This man was very, very, very unkempt and appeared to be completely insane. He didn't say one real word as they walked him to the car, just this unintelligible, creepy gibberish. He growled at us as he was being put into the back seat and started spitting. So after some inspection, they found that he had entered from the guest room window downstairs, which didn't have a pathway but a planter directly outside of it, hence the mud. It must have gotten watered by the automatic sprinklers just minutes before he got there, because it was a muddy disaster inside. After about 40 minutes of talking with Todd's dad, the cops leave. His dad tells us that we did the right thing, but I could tell he was shaken up. We still continued our routine the next day and eventually things got back to normal, though the first few weeks after were pretty scary. Now I know a lot of you will be thinking, this is just a sad story of a man without a home, and on some levels I agree. But this man wasn't just crazy, he was angry. And after hearing that he had a knife sitting next to him on the toilet, I'm not completely convinced of his innocence. I guess the police didn't want to freak us out or whatever, but we never even saw the knife. It was only after Todd's dad had told him later that day, and then he told us. The knife was not taken from Todd's kitchen either, which makes it that much creepier. It's possible that it was just his tool, or that it was just for his own protection or whatever. But regardless, not fucking cool. So likely deranged intruder. Let's not meet again.